Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for attending the March webinar for Downtown Rapid Transit. My name is Jarrett Hubbard. I am the project manager for Downtown Rapid Transit for the city of Rochester, and I'll be joined tonight by Adele Hall and Jim Gersema from SRF presenting on tonight's presentation. Before we get going, as always, we do invite questions as part of our sessions. There are two ways you can go ahead and do that. The first is we will stop during the presentation a few times to open up the line and allow you to ask your questions. If you're interested in asking your questions live, you can go ahead and use the raise your hand feature on your toolbar. And that'll let us know that you wish to ask a question, and then we'll do some things in the background to allow you to go ahead and unmute your mic and ask your question. And as always, you can always use the Q&A box to go ahead and ask your questions in between or even during the Q&A sections, and we can go ahead and answer those. With that being said, tonight, as a few of you are new and a few of you have been around, we have been committed to doing these monthly webinars during the pandemic to update the community on Downtown Rapid Transit. The last couple have been a little more focused on specific subjects. Last month, we talked heavily on traffic. We will have a brief review of that information here tonight. And then our next couple are going to be highly focused as well on subjects. So that brings us to tonight. Tonight is going to be a general project update. We'll spend a lot of time doing kind of the background about where Rapid Transit came from and what the project includes. And then we'll take a few minutes to take a brief look at some of the additional features that we're looking to include as part of Downtown Rapid Transit. And we'll conclude with a brief kind of recap on the traffic work that was done for the project. With that, I'll go ahead and introduce Adele Hall from SRF, and she'll lead us through the background information on Downtown Rapid Transit.
Thanks, Jarrett, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I will provide an overview of the project, and if you're familiar with it, this will look familiar to you. And if you're not familiar, welcome, and we will give you about as much as you could ever hope to know about Rochester Rapid Transit tonight. So when we talk about Rochester Rapid Transit or the project, we're talking about a 3-mile bus rapid transit line, and on those 3 miles, there'd be 7 stations. We'll have a map in just a few slides here and show exactly where those stations are planned. Those stations would be connected for the most part by what we refer to as business access and transit lanes. These are painted lanes that are for buses and for people in cars who are turning right only. So that frees up that lane so that buses can move freely and stay on schedule. It really helps with their reliability and their speed. So part of putting the rapid in bus rapid transit. And other components of the project include reconstruction of 2nd Street Southwest between 16th and 11th Avenues. And part of that reconstruction is constructing a new pedestrian access tunnel or a subway between St. Mary's Hospital and a new St. Mary's Transit Plaza on the north side of 2nd Street. Finally, the bus rapid transit line will use a fleet of electric vehicles. They'll be about 60 feet long. They have an accordion in the middle. We call them articulated bus. And they're a longer bus because we are expecting high volumes of ridership on this line at the same time. Using electric vehicles is a way of making the line a little more sustainable with use of potentially use of renewable energy sources. So we'll go to the next slide now. Thanks, Alicia. So what is rapid transit exactly? It is a high quality transit experience, and we try to provide that both by providing frequent all day service So really often, really frequent service, so you don't have to wait for very long at any given time. And that while you're waiting or while you're on the bus, it's a comfortable wait, it's a comfortable ride. So a lot of the features revolve around comfort at stations and good information. So you see here at stations, they will have shelter and lighting and heat, as well as emergency phones, cameras. Um, Another aspect of keeping the rapid and bus rapid transit is this these few aspects around paying your fare. So right now you think about, you get on the bus, you pay your fare in front of the bus driver, and then you go back and you sit down. And with BRT, you'll pay your fare on at the station itself. So when the bus shows up, you can enter via any door and there's no line to pay on the bus. So you can imagine this makes boarding the bus much faster, especially at stations where there might be 50 people boarding the bus at one time. Um, we also, Bus rapid transit also features level boarding, which means that the curb at the station location is raised a little bit, and that is so that the curb can meet the bus when it pulls up, and someone in a mobility device or someone using a stroller or a cart can just roll right on to the bus. And then finally at stations, uh, there will be ridership information in kiosks. So, kind of real time information about when the next trip will arrive, or scheduled trips throughout the day, maps, other information about the city, wayfinding, that kind of thing. And finally, I mentioned those business access and transit lanes as a way of keeping the buses moving and speedy. Another aspect of keeping buses moving and speedy is what we call transit signal priority, and that's a communication system between the bus and traffic signals to essentially either hold a green for a bus or trip the green a little earlier, so that a bus can move through an intersection more efficiently. So all these things are meant to add up to a really high quality experience for users. Thanks, Alicia. You can go ahead. So I mentioned earlier that high frequency service, more specifically on weekdays, the buses will run every 5 minutes during the rush hours in the morning and the evening, and then every 10 minutes other times, including on the weekends. So really frequent service during the rush hours, and really high quality levels of service other times. Because of those business access and transit lanes, because of that transit signal priority, the buses are moving fairly swiftly from the West Transit Village, which is currently the Mayo West lot, to the Government Center in less than 15 minutes. We anticipate that on opening day, about almost exactly 4 years from now, in spring of 2025, there'll be approximately 11,000 rides a day on the rapid transit line. And finally, the service will run from early in the morning, 5 a.m., to late at night, 11, on weekdays, and then starts a little later on weekends, 8 to 11 service will run. So I said we'd get to this map, more specific station location and the project route. So the route will primarily run on 2nd Street Southwest, starting on the west at the West Transit Village, or otherwise known as the Mayo West Lot. And it'll proceed down 2nd Street, obviously stopping at 19th Avenue there, serving the commercial node and the neighborhoods to the north and south of the station. And then the next station, of course, at St. Mary's, serving the hospital as well as the adjacent neighborhoods. And that is the station that will have the transit plaza and the pedestrian tunnel underneath 2nd Street. And then downtown stations at 6th on the edge of downtown, and at 2nd Avenue in the heart of downtown. And then at the Civic Center, so right at the end of 2nd Street, where it meets Civic Center Drive and 3rd Avenue. Um, the Civic Center station is situated. And then finally on 4th Street Southeast is the Government Center station. So that is the project route and stations, and we can go to the next one. Thanks, Alicia. And many of you have tuned into these meetings before and been involved, I think, in these efforts, but you know that this plan didn't come out of nowhere, that there's been a lot of buildup to the plan, starting with the city's downtown master plan way back in 2010, and kind of progressing from there. After the DMC was formed, they created a development plan for the DMC district in 2015, and that spells out the growth goals for Rochester. And that plan, I think, was just updated in 2020. I believe there's a draft version available online now that renews those growth projections, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. The Transit Development Plan in 2017 is the Rochester Public Transit's overall plan for the entire transit network. And then the 2040 Comprehensive Plan, of course, mentions a primary transit network for the city, which consists of several future high frequency, high capacity transit routes, and you can see them on the map on the right there. So that was also part of planning for this line, and Second Street Southwest was one of the streets outlined as part of that primary transit network. Finally, then kind of getting more focused on transit in 2018, the integrated transit studies were published. These are a little more focused on downtown and considering both traffic and parking as well as transit in downtown and how all those things fit together with growth in downtown Rochester. The integrated transit studies led into an alternatives evaluation, which was an examination of mode of transit and routes for the first line in Rochester. And out of that, the recommendation was bus rapid transit on 2nd Street. And then in 2020, the city finished a transit-oriented development station area planning effort, which really focused on land use and future development and access to the stations along this first bus rapid transit line. So lots of history and build up. So one of the things that I referred to, you can go ahead, Alicia, thank you. Um, One of the things I referred to in that DMC development plan is an important component of this next slide. So we get the question a lot with with COVID-19. Obviously, everything has changed, but travel patterns have maybe changed most of all, right? Where many people are working from home or just not going places as much, and transit ridership is way down. Transit, people are encouraged only to ride transit for essential trips, and travel is way down. And so we've had many questions about, well, does this project still make sense in light of those changes during COVID? And what we keep coming back to is that the growth in Rochester, and in particular in downtown Rochester, is absolutely still anticipated, and that growth is really what is driving the need for this project. So you see those graphs on the right side there. 55,000 new residents in Rochester, 50,000 new jobs in Rochester, much of that growth concentrated in downtown. And so you see on the bottom that mode share graphic, what the city and its partners are trying to do is to really hold that number of motor vehicle trips in 2040, hold that number almost the same as it is today. But because there's so many more trips made in 2040, really decreasing the percentage of the overall trips that are made in single occupancy vehicles to downtown, and really spreading out those trips across modes. So having 30% of trips to downtown made on transit instead of the 10% today, bumping up carpooling from 12% of trips today to 14% of trips in 2040, and also nearly doubling the percentage of people who are biking or walking to their destination in downtown. So we've heard from Mayo Clinic that they are committed to downtown rapid transit, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. And also that updated DMC development plan that I referenced earlier is maintains these growth projections and reaffirms that reliable transit is a really important way of ensuring that this growth can happen in a way that's sustainable and keeps the quality of life in Rochester intact. So I mentioned that Mayo has stated their ongoing support for the project. They issued a letter in February of this year saying that they are absolutely still on board with the project progressing, and this project is pursuing Federal Transit Administration funding, so federal funding for construction of the line, and Mayo Clinic supports the continued pursuit of those funds, and it also added that they believe that strong collaboration between um, the public, the city, and the DMC, and themselves as private stakeholders is what's going to allow that growth to proceed and the recovery to proceed. And I think this is a really important thing to address. Just we all know Mayo is such a big employer downtown. They are driving a lot of the trips to downtown from employees and from visitors. So they're a big part of those growth projections, and so they're a big part of this Rochester Rapid Transit story. So I mentioned wanting to maintain this quality of life in Rochester while also taking on the growth in jobs and population, and that is really what's driving that need for that mode shift that you saw in that graphic earlier, and an increase in transit and biking and walking and carpooling trips. And the reason for that is that if we were to stay with the mode split that we have today, with nearly 70 or more than 70% of trips to downtown in single occupancy vehicles, we will end up with very congested streets, and nearly 40% more miles driven every day. And the congestion will be most noticeable on streets in and around downtown. And then when those cars get downtown, they need a place to park, and parking needs space. And so this diagram on the right side here shows how many city blocks would be needed for parking, if that mode shift to more transit, more biking and walking does not happen. There would be several downtown blocks that would need to be converted for parking, and that is that's a big trade-off to make. For those blocks could be used for lots of other things: housing, office, schools, parks, all sorts of things, and overall uh, result in an overall less um, friendly downtown, fewer things to do, harder to walk places, and also uh, puts parking for people who don't necessarily maybe live downtown, puts it first and foremost and squeezes out easier parking for people who might live downtown. So in addition to all of the kind of avoidance things we just talked about, rapid transit, of course, has its own benefits. And one of them is that with the conversion to electric buses, but even without electric buses, transit is a very uh, economical, sustainable way to bring a lot of people downtown, and investing in the high quality station infrastructure in the buses themselves conveys permanence, conveys an investment in Rochester residents and Rochester institutions and employers. And it is a way of providing a high quality amenity to current transit riders and new riders. And I talked a lot about earlier all the things that are part of the project to make those buses go faster, and then also, because they're going to run frequently and because the buses are going to be long, having the capacity to really carry a lot of people mitigates the effects of potentially increased traffic with that growth downtown. So I'm going to turn a little more to some nuts and bolts of how these projects are developed. Um, you could probably tell from the presentation thus far, there's a lot of components, a lot of moving parts, and this timeline gives kind of a sense of some of the concurrent efforts that are going on. The project is actively working toward an opening day in spring of 2025, 4 years from now, and currently, that top line you'll see it says FTA Capital Investment Grant Program. That is that federal funding source that I mentioned. So last fall, the city submitted an application to that funding program, and we are anticipating a rating of the project to be published this spring. That rating gives an indication of whether the project would enter kind of an eligible pool of projects that could be funded. It's definitely not a they're not quite handing over the check, but it's a really important milestone that we are awaiting this spring. Another thing that the project team is actively working on is advancing the preliminary design of the project. So we just hit that 30% design plan milestone just a couple weeks ago, and the station architecture has been a really important component of that preliminary design work, and we'll talk a little more about that later. And then we are also advancing the project's environmental review. So because the project is pursuing federal funds, it needs to be in compliance with that National Environmental Policy Act. So we are working on an environmental analysis to do just that. So you'll see here uh, uh, final design starting at the beginning of 2022, construction starting at the very end of 2022 and into 2023 and 2024. And again, that opening day coming 2025. So many of you have participated in our webinars, the project webinars, and are probably familiar with some of our virtual engagement activities. Jarrett mentioned some of them at the very beginning, uh, and and we are kind of building on a long tradition um, of public and community engagement in those previous studies that I mentioned, including the integrated transit studies, the alternatives evaluation, and the transit-oriented development planning, which is that picture on the right there. And of course, over this last year, we've had to take that show completely virtual, and and so our efforts have been mostly focused on really improving the project website, getting a lot more information out there and getting it organized. And if you haven't checked out the project website, I invite you to do that. We'll have the link at the end of the presentation. On the project website, there's a link to our interactive map, which is kind of fun. You can click on the map and leave comments there. You can see comments that other folks have left. Project staff monitor that regularly and can answer questions via that route as well. We also have been hosting these monthly virtual events. And like Jarrett said earlier, we've had some topical ones where we've really focused on a specific topic. We've got one coming up in next month that's about that primary transit network and really the kind of future of rapid transit more broadly, and future of transit more broadly in Rochester. That's next month. And in May, we will have one about the station architecture, and much more detail on that with some cool visualizations then. And we'll have the dates for those at the end. Some of them are still TBD. Um, and then we've also been having some office hours on the off months where we don't have a topic, and those are kind of nice. It's a little more of a conversation, a little less presentation, and feel free to join those to be able to talk with staff about the project and just have more of a conversation. We also have had some surveys about more specific elements of the project that have gone out. And then finally, we mentioned the reconstruction of 2nd Street between 11th and 16th Avenues. We have been lately focused on one-on-one business outreach to all the businesses in that segment of 2nd Street, just to make sure that they're aware of the project and that they're aware of the construction headed their way, even though it's still a ways out. So one really kind of unique and exciting part of the engagement for this project, even in this virtual space, has been the co-design effort. And um, the co-designers are a team of 10 Rochester residents. They're quite diverse in their background and ethnicity and age. And they were hired by the project team to really advance and contribute to the station design and architecture. So they have met regularly with project staff and have influenced the kind of the design principles, and you'll see there the emphasis on ensuring accessibility to achieve equity. I think that's one of the main principles that this group really promoted, and that is influencing the design of the stations. They also have really prioritized and figured out which we kind of had a menu of potential amenities or characteristics of the stations, and they really prioritize those to figure out which are absolute essentials for the stations. And they are also about to embark on kind of forming the vision for the St. Mary's Transit Plaza on the north side of 2nd Street there. So that's what this group has been up to. They are about midway through their tenure, maybe a little past midway through their tenure in the co-design process now. So that brings us to the question and answer section. I know I covered a lot of ground there, and this is kind of just a chance for folks to ask questions and other folks to speak up.
Thank you, Adele. Yes, you covered the background very well and got us going. And so this is, we said we would take some time through to tonight's session to open it up and try to answer any questions. And so one way to ask a question is to use the raise your hand feature, and then we can go ahead and allow you to go ahead and ask a question live. Or you can always go ahead and submit your questions via the Q&A box on the bottom as well. And in the time since we started, we have received one question in the Q&A box, and that question it comes back to the map and the station locations, and it was really asking, are those stations locations, can they be adjusted or moving forward, or are they pretty much locked? The answer is those stations are pretty much locked. That's not to say that there couldn't be some small changes here in the near future, but for the most part, those seven locations that we have chosen for this first phase of this rapid transit project are pretty locked, ready to go, and would require some significant redoing, working with not only the public but also the Federal Transit Administration to get those reassigned. I did see another question or questions pop up here. The question about the Mayo employee shuttles. Yes, the intention is that when downtown rapid transit is up and opens and starts operating, that the Mayo employee shuttles, particularly the ones that serve downtown, would cease to exist, and that all of those riders that currently ride that system, particularly in downtown, would ride downtown rapid transit. Let's see here. The next question is going to take me a second to read here. A question about operation hours and extending those hours. I would say two things about the hours of operation on either weekday or in the weekend. The first one is those hours that we showed you a second ago are kind of preliminary to help get us some cost estimates and to try to outline how what the project may look like. Very much so, that 5 to 11, particularly on the weekdays, is still open for negotiation. And we know that particularly that 11 o'clock timeline does not meet a few of the shifts or one particular shift of the Mayo employees. So we're looking at trying to extend that, and we're kind of working that out in the background. But also this individual asked the question about events and activities at the Civic Center and allowing for that additional time. I think that is definitely something that we are very much interested in and can always adjust and move based on the activities at the Civic Center. I'll take a quick second to see if one more question pops on in before we continue forward. Oh, one did pop on in. The question is, what's the vision for the West Transit Village? The concept behind the West Transit Village, it would be a multi-use kind of a location where you have several different activities going on. The first and primary activity would be parking. It is proposed to have a Mayo parking structure for their employees that would be about 2,000 plus parking spaces out there. And then we are talking about having open public parking out there. That would be a minimum of 100 when we open, with the possibility of expanding that in the future. But besides parking, we are also trying to turn it into a village, and part of that village is also having a residential on site, some condos or apartment type units out there located at the site, as well as some a commercial, may it be a coffee shop, restaurants, or just some local neighborhood features that might be a good fit for that location out there. The back half of the question is also about will West Transit Village become a kind of a transit hub? Will RPT and other services stop out there and utilize that for a hub for transit and transferring? The concept right now that we're moving forward with Downtown Rapid Transit is that it will not. But that's to say that every 5 years, as Adele pointed out, the Rochester Public Transit is required to do their 5-year plan, what the future might hold. And 2021, luckily, is that year for Rochester Public Transit to look at that. And so that will be a one heavy element of the document looking forward, is how does the local neighborhood service of Rochester Public Transit interact and coordinate, and will coordinate with the current, the future Downtown Rapid Transit service. With that, maybe we'll go ahead and get moving on to the next series of slides in our deck here. And these slides are going to focus in on the features or the amenities offered by the Downtown Rapid Transit System, or the Bus Rapid Transit System. And as Adele, before we went to the question session, as Adele outlined, the co-designers have been a real huge part of providing input and putting guidance to the project. And one of the first questions we went ahead and asked that co-design group was to prioritize what those amenities and features might look like. So we're going to take a quick look at those. And instead of sitting here and reading off a list of what those amenities are to you, the team, the Rapid Transit team kind of went ahead and created these personas, or these characters, to help try to outline what some of those key features may be. So first is Laura. Laura is an employee, a Mayo employee, and who uses a wheelchair, and she likes the ability for that is that the buses will offer level boarding so that she can roll right onto the bus. And then once on the bus, she can utilize a user-operated wheelchair system that goes ahead and locks the wheelchair in place for safety and security. And that system does not require additional time or the driver coming back and assisting with that locking device. Up next is Jin. Jin is a grandparent who loves to take his grandchildren into downtown Rochester, particularly for the parks and then to go to the library during the day. And so he really loves the ability that, once again, that there's level boarding, so you can push a stroller right onto the bus. And then once on the bus, he likes the ability that there's accessible seating and that there are flexible seating options for him to sit there with his grandchildren. And then, of course, he loves the information kiosk to help find his way around downtown as well. Up next is Marco. Marco is an employee, say, of a restaurant or a retail location in downtown. And his preference is to commute to and from work via bicycle. And so on those days where he just doesn't feel the need for the bicycle, or ends up being rain and on the way home when he rode in on the bicycle, he really likes the ability to roll his bike onto the bus and store and lock and set up his bike on the bus, and to at least get a portion of his trip back home in safety and climate control facility. And of course, Marco, being a bicyclist, is very interested in sustainable issues and really does like the electric bus feature that Downtown Rapid Transit offers. Up next is Monique. Monique is an employee at St. Mary's Hospital, and she really loves the larger buses that they'll be offered. As Adele mentioned, we were looking at utilizing 60-foot buses. So these would be the larger buses. And with larger buses means that we can carry more people. And then additionally, these buses have 3 doors, and that because of the off-board pavement, riders can walk on in any of the 3 doors. So with all of those additional bus features, the size and the doors, there's little need for me to stand in line and wait at St. Mary's to get on the bus. Additionally, she really likes the tunnel that provides climate control to get from one side of the 2nd Street to the other, and then the real-time arrival sign, so she knows how long the next bus is when the next bus might arrive. Finally, we're going to conclude with AJ. AJ is a patient of Mayo's and been in town a few times, and he's noticed these unique buses running around with these unique stations. And one of the reasons he's able to do that is Downtown Rapid Transit is going to have a unique branding brand for all of Rochester Public Transit. So the buses will have a little design or color designs like the one here in this image. And then also the stations themselves will be marked with station identification markers, similar to the one here on the screen. And from his visits, he's noticed that he's done a little research and found out that this is a great way for him to come back into town and go to a convention at our Civic Center. So he's obtained a hotel room along the corridor and is utilizing Downtown Rapid Transit to get to and from his hotel to the Civic Center via Downtown Rapid Transit. He also likes the additional digital information offered about when the next bus is going to arrive and when the next stop is going to come on up. So that kind of gives you a high level of some of the key features and how they might be used in Downtown Rapid Transit. So here we reached our second pause in the presentation to take a look and ask any questions. So once again, if you want to raise your hand or submit any in the chat box. And one question did come on in, and it's the question of the cost and how it will be funded. The current cost estimate for Downtown Rapid Transit is $114 million. As Adele mentioned, we are seeking roughly 50%. It's actually 49% of the project will be. We're hoping will be funded by the Federal Transit Administration, or the FTA, and then the remaining 51% will be paid by primarily Destination Medical Center funds that are explicitly outlined for transit need and infrastructure need in Downtown Rapid Transit. A few additional resources will go to the project for the downtown reconstruction piece and a few other things. But for the most part, the 2 funding sources for Downtown Rapid Transit are federal funds along with Destination Medical Center, or DMC funds. A question about the number of buses, and particularly number of buses running at one time. During our peak times, during those morning commute and after evening or afternoon commute times, we are looking at up to 7 or even 8 buses might be running at one time to try to handle all the additional passengers that we will have during the system. In the end, we are looking at purchasing 10 or 11 buses. So we always have backups or spares, that's what they're called. But in the end, we'll probably be running up to 7 or 8 at a time. And probably there'll always be at least 2 running, even during off times. Let's see, I'll take a quick pause here to see if any more questions come on in. And with that, maybe we'll move on to our next section of our presentation and talk through traffic and kind of the traffic modeling work that we've done and has been done over the last several years. And for that, I'll turn it over to Jim Gersimuth, SRF Consulting.
All right, thank you, Jarrett. So Alicia, if you can go to the next slides. So going back to some of the things and themes that we heard earlier in the presentation about the importance of mode shift and how that's a big part of how the city is planning to manage the growth in downtown. That importance is geared toward not needing to build that additional parking and provide those additional options for those trips into downtown. The high frequency transit service that's being suggested as part of that plan, as well as the more robust park and ride system and growth in residents in downtown that can just simply walk to and from work, and that live, work, and play in downtown aspect. Also, we're looking to provide a park once philosophy where you can get on rapid transits, go downtown, hop back on again, go somewhere else to eat and get back to your car later in the day. Go ahead, Alicia. So as we mentioned earlier, if nothing else happens, there'll be 40% more miles driven each day, with a good portion of that happening on those major corridors in the city: Civic Center Drive, 2nd Street, Highway 52, Highway 14, and Broadway. And that's something that is a concern in terms of how people are going to get to downtown. If the growth in downtown does happen, those portals, those streets into downtown just can't handle that much additional traffic. And so Rochester Rapid Transit is one of those ways that we're looking to mitigate some of those additional miles traveled and be able to provide that access into downtown. Let's see if we can move on. Oh. So some of the key takeaways from the traffic study that was done are listed here, with one big one, the first one on there, that Broadway Avenue South will not have any changes to it as part of Rochester Rapid Transit, while the route does traverse on Broadway for a few blocks or between 2nd Street and 4th Street. That bus will be operating in the same lanes as in any other car, and so working in mixed traffic to get back to 2nd Street. Additionally, the Rochester Rapid Transit line does not negatively impact traffic beyond what those future projections are. And so with that projected growth in there, the inclusion of the Rochester Rapid Transit project doesn't negatively impact traffic more than what's already anticipated as traffic volumes grow. And as I mentioned earlier, those traffic volumes will make those streets going into downtown congested. They don't have the capacity to be able to handle that much traffic going into downtown with the projected growth. In the situation that we're talking about, it's going to be more difficult for residents to turn from side streets onto 2nd Street. With or without Rochester Rapid Transit, that's going to be a reality as traffic does grow within the city. And in order to manage that growth, we do need to see that mode shift from the commuters. We do need to see them move to transit, move to carpooling, and move to ped and bike access. BAT lanes, business access and transit lanes on the Second Street corridor can be accommodated through much of the corridor. Primarily that's going to show up between 14th Avenue and Civic Center Drive onto 3rd Avenue there, and on 2nd Street between 18th Avenue and 23rd Avenue west of Highway 52. Those are the areas where the inclusion of that BAT lane does not impact traffic in the corridor. Next slide. We will be looking to operate Rochester Rapid Transit in mixed traffic west of 23rd Avenue and on Broadway Avenue South, as I previously mentioned. But also included in that is operating in mixed traffic through the Highway 52 interchange area between there and 14th Avenue, that St. Mary's access type condition where 2 lanes of traffic in each direction are needed for that access to St. Mary's in that high traffic volume area. Additionally, the traffic study suggested, and we've incorporated into the project, left turn lanes at certain intersections to help keep traffic moving and provide that better access into the neighborhood. And with the project, we do see some small shifts of traffic and travel patterns through here, primarily onto Civic Center Drive and 6th Street, as well as West Circle Drive. Very, very minor adjustments into the travel patterns in the neighborhood streets, but primarily into those adjacent parallel other arterial streets. Those streets, like Civic Center Drive and 6th Street, are anticipated to have other improvements needed in this future period between now and 2045. And that's needed with or without the Rochester Rapid Transit project. So those corridors are anticipated to have improvements in the near future with or without the project. And kind of concluding, the Rochester Rapid Transit project is just one project, one element to a broader set of goals and solutions to accommodate this growth and achieve the downtown goals set forth by the city. So with that takes us to our last question and answer segment. So I'm going to pass it off to Alicia and Jarrett to field these questions.
Thank you, Jim. And once again, you can go ahead and raise your hand or submit your questions. This will be a great time for that. We did receive a couple of questions come on in, but let's Barry, you've had your hand up for quite a while. Alicia, can you go ahead and allow Barry? And it looks like he just needs to unmute. Barry, you there?
Yeah, I'm there. I also attended the morning session, and there you said there was a possibility of assessments for completing this project. Although you said the majority of the money would come from DMC, you also mentioned that there was the possibility of some assessments, and the council will be getting a package in April to deal with the assessments issue. Could you expand a little on that? And I don't know if you talked about the environmental impact, but I just want to think the audience should be aware of that in this session as well, about the impact on the neighborhoods like a few blocks in.
Thank you, Barry. Let's go back and talk about funding first. Yes, primarily most funding sources, 96, 97, 98% of our funding sources will for the project are expected to come from either the Federal Transit Administration or the Destination Medical Center funding. So there is a small portion coming from a few other pots. As Barry mentioned, there is the review and consideration of property assessments. That is a part of any local, particularly street project, and many of our communities have also seen assessments as part of sidewalks. And Barry is correct that next month the City Council will be receiving an update and kind of some suggestions on the path forward, how to address assessments for all street and sidewalk projects moving forward. as a way to try to make it equal and so that we don't, not one project ends up hurting one property over another property. So it's not just next month, we will not be, the City Council will not only just be looking at assessments for this project, but for all projects moving forward. And so that will be under review. Additionally, to the environmental side, staying on the funding, there was one question that came on in if Mayo will be assisting to help pay for the system. Because Downtown Rapid Transit will be replacing the Mayo employee shuttle. It is anticipated, and we are currently under negotiations. When I say we, I mean the City of Rochester is currently under negotiations with Mayo Clinic about how much the financial support they will be supplying, particularly to the operations of Downtown Rapid Transit. On the environmental side, let me add to that question a bit, just say again, that is with a federal project, it takes quite a long time to get, and we're still looking at opening up service not until 2025. And part of that, one of those elements that takes a long time on the timeline is the environmental piece, and which is required by the federal government. And Adele, can you help provide some further clarity around what that looks like?
Certainly. So as Jarrett mentioned, because of the federal funding, the project needs to be in conformance with the National Environmental Policy Act, which essentially requires the Federal Transit Administration and the City of Rochester as the sponsors of this project to investigate the potential impacts the project will have both on like the social and community environment and the built environment, as well as the natural environment. So often when we think of environmental documents, we think of, you know, birds and wildlife and water, and those things are all included, but it's also a consideration of how the project will affect the community and neighborhoods and things like access and property. So it's kind of a wide ranging document that covers about 22 discrete topics, I believe. So yeah, and we will have a more detailed webinar on the environmental process and what we're finding in terms of the project's results or the project's impacts, and how those impacts will be mitigated or avoided. We will do in June. So we're kind of midway through the analysis right now.
Thanks, Adele. Kurt has raised his hand, and I wondered if Alicia, you can go ahead and make it able. So Kurt, if you can unmute yourself, you should be able to ask your question. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question, and let's see here. Okay, I just think, okay, okay, and I know the city has been like trying to get this done for like some time, but one question: why would the project will take 5 years to complete? And let's see here. All right. I want to touch up on a few things, but why will the project see how much for the city? I'm sorry, let me repeat my question. What I mean is, how much will the city pay for it? And or the big question is, why is operations going to take place in the 2025? Is there a reason for that?
Okay. I'll go ahead and try to answer what takes so long. Essentially, because we are going after federal funds, we have to follow the federal process, and which is the reason why it takes roughly 4 to 5 years to go about. And that is not unnormal of any transportation project that receives federal funds. It does take some time to go ahead and proceed through all the phases. And as we talked about a second ago, environmental is one of those large pieces of that process. But Additionally, there's several checks that the Federal Transit Administration will have in review of the project. So it just typically takes that long and to get a project delivered such like this. Unfortunately, yes, the spring of 2025 is the soonest we can start operation on the service. Did receive a question came on in here on about the 60-foot buses and their ability to corner. We have seen that 60-foot buses can able to handle it. And actually, Rochester Public Transit is in the process of purchasing a couple of buses that hopefully will be come online for use to the park and ride lots here shortly. I see Jim came off of mute. Jim, you have additional piece to add about the buses?
Yeah, I just want to say that if I recall correctly, Adele described these 60-foot buses of being sometimes referred to as having an accordion joint. So they do bend in the middle, and so they're able to maneuver and turn tight corners the same as any other 40-foot bus or regular city bus can.
All right, thank you, Jim. We're in our last few minutes of our session here, and see if any more questions come on in. I see Barry, you have your hand raised. We'll see if you can get you unmuted and ready to go real quick here. There you go, and need to unmute Barry.
Yeah, no, have you gotten any more information about the ability of the buses to withstand the cold climate? Because I know there was some talk, like the last time I spoke, about what's going to happen, like up in Duluth, where they sort of had to sort of suspend operations, and in Minneapolis. I know you were getting these new buses to try them out, but I'm just wondering exactly what would happen if they don't actually meet the idea that they run in the bitter cold.
Thank you, Barry, for the question. And what Barry's referring to is both Metro Transit in the Twin Cities, a line primarily, it's a couple lines that primarily serve Minneapolis, and then Duluth. Both have electric vehicles that they currently operate, and both have seen some different challenges with electric buses. In Duluth, it's been more of an issue of going up and down the hills, if you're familiar with Duluth, and the challenges that might perceive. And then more recently, there was an announcement from Metro Transit about maybe moving slightly away from electric buses. We were able to talk with Metro Transit and try to gather a little more information. And I would say, to be clear again, we are have a good relationship. When I say we, I mean Rochester Public Transit and their staff have a good relationship with the Metro Transit team, and have had open communications for a while now about how the electric vehicles have been serving them. In short, what we have found out about Metro Transit and some of their challenges, it's been a lot of small issues, a lot of issues that were maybe overpromised, underdelivered types of things. Additionally, some of the new systems that that Metro Transit is proposed are very, very long routes that start to push 15+ miles and go from the far north side to the far south side, even some of the suburbs. And so those buses have had a bit of a challenge operating in that distance. And because of that, they've had to do on-route charging, and which is what we're proposed to do even in our system to make sure those buses run. And additionally, that's what those additional spares are for, of trying to run those buses. I see one last question came on in with the Q&A box. The question essentially is expanding bus routes more outside of town. I think we'll have to look at that. RPT will be looking at that as part of the 2021 development plan, transit development plan, and that can be looked at. We are at 6 o'clock and we are scheduled for only an hour. So I really appreciate everyone attending tonight. So I'm going to start the process here of wrapping up. We once again, a bunch of information on our project webpage. That's rochestermm.gov/rapid transit. And one of those elements is to submit some comments to us on what's known as a wiki map for additional information. And there you can see the web page link. And then also, if you have additional comments and questions, we have 2 additional ways outside of our webinars to ask those questions. The first is the email, that's rapidtransit@rochestermm.gov. And then the phone number 507-328-2025, that's 328-2025. As I mentioned earlier, we are committed to trying to do these webinars monthly to try to get out information and receive some feedback on some things as we work through rapid transit. Next month has been scheduled and it is for April 21st, I believe. Yep. Thank you, Alicia, for pulling that one back on up. You can go ahead on our webpage, once again, rochestermm.gov/rapid transit, to go ahead and register for that for those sessions. Once again, there'll be a noon session and then a 5 o'clock session on that. And the focus of that session will be kind of a zoom out or a broader picture of the planning work that's been done to get us to this point for rapid transit, and to show what future planning is going to be done on transit all across town, including that transit development plan being done by, or that 5-year plan being done by Rochester Public Transit. We're also a couple more events, May and June, dates to be determined. But once again, in May, our focus will be on the platforms or the station architecture. What will those be looking like? And we'll have some pictures and images for you to look at and respond to on those. And then in June, we'll come back and present our early findings and recommendations when it comes to the environmental findings. And that includes historic preservation pieces. Once again, I thank you all. I see a couple more questions, but you came on in. I'll ask those individuals to reach out to me either at my email or that Rochester Rapid Transit email, the rapidtransit@rochestermm.gov email, and we can try to get those questions answered. Once again, thank you all for attending tonight. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate the open conversation that we've been having at our sessions. And thank you all and have a good night.